You've been subject to propaganda and lies by people who are very well trained in how they do that. And if you find one thing your government has said which is clearly not true, I ask you this: why would you believe anything else they've told you? Don't you think that retired ex-Pfizer guy might have something after all? I beg of you to no longer assume what you're being told is true. I can't sweep away highly accurately done propaganda by people who are lying to you. If you would like to stand behind the desk called Comfortable Lies, there's absolutely nothing I can do to stop you. But if you would like to go to the desk called Uncomfortable Truths, which is the one I'm sitting behind, then welcome.
History is truly at a turning point.
Are you afraid of the flu?
We didn't really understand the fatality rate. We didn't understand that it's a fairly low fatality rate and that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like flu is.
Do you hear what he's saying? And it mostly affects the elderly. And he said it was like the flu. That's what he said. Now, if I said those things, they'd take my channel down on YouTube. And this is what we ruined everyone's life over. And now he's admitting it. And no one gives a shit. No one. This isn't going to be run on CNN for a week.
When someone dies of cancer, for instance, generally it's pneumonia or the flu that takes them out. It's like they're so weak that if they get the flu or if they even get a bad cold or pneumonia, that's everybody knows, right? That's common knowledge, right? Yep. But they don't put the flu for cause of death. They put cancer still, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to COVID, which is same symptoms, it's a coronavirus, they mark that as the cause of death. What if everybody that died of the flu that had cancer and the flu took them out, what if they marked that as a flu death? How many flu deaths would we have a year? Like 1 million? Right. We would have like 1 million flu deaths a year, right?
More, yeah. Do they do that with?
It's interesting, isn't it?
They had no flu cases, which was the wildest shit ever. Like if you look at the flu, there's a map that they had like red for a positive test of the flu during flu season, and then they showed 2020. In the year 2020, it's like a non-existent flu season.
Yeah.
It was the lowest recorded numbers of flu ever.
There's your flu last year. Here's your flu this year. Literally doesn't even exist. It's not even there. Look. And again, this is the CDC's numbers. CDC's numbers. The flu is magically gone. It's all COVID now.
I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death.
What she said is, it doesn't matter what you die of. If we test you and you have COVID, we're marking it as a COVID death from a test that can't even distinguish COVID from the flu.
Governments all over the world, and including the United States, sent out instructions to doctors saying, change the way you fill out death certificates. And what they told them to do is essentially attribute everything as much as possible to COVID. And so then if they had someone who died of flu symptoms, they would say, oh, well, those are the symptoms of COVID, and they put COVID on the death certificate. And they would never, they would just not consider the flu because they're told to put COVID. And then you have all of the death numbers showing these COVID deaths, and then you look at the flu deaths and they're like practically zero. Right? Now, something that happens every year over and over again doesn't simply go away one year. What actually happened is that flu cases were just relabeled as COVID cases to give the appearance that there was a new deadly disease. But there really wasn't any. There was just those flu patients had other illnesses. Like some of them had died of a gunshot wound and they were labeled as a COVID death, right? One pedestrian got hit by a bus in the UK and was labeled as a COVID death.
So there are also new questions over whether Florida counties are correctly tabulating coronavirus deaths.
One of the answers really surprised us. He told us that one person actually died in a motorcycle accident. And he told us that that had gone into the COVID numbers, and he had asked the state to remove that number. And when asked if it had actually been removed or cleared from that data, he said he didn't think so, he wasn't sure, but he was going to double check on that. And so that's when we started asking questions here.
Everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death.
By this point last year, there were over 174,000 confirmed cases of flu. This flu season, look at that, has only 1,499 confirmed cases. That is less than 1% of the total this time last year.
PCR tests can't distinguish between the flu and COVID. Are we looking at that? Are we concerned about that?
We have got virtually no flu in Australia. Like last year, there is virtually no flu to be found.
They have this category of flu cases in their mortality statistics and also just the incidence of flu. And suddenly, when COVID came, the flu just disappeared.
Only one person in the entire state died from the flu.
It was unexpected and very surprising, but literally there was nearly no flu this year in the Southern Hemisphere.
In partnership with CDC and state and local governments, utilizing the surveillance systems that are available, what we just talked about, the flu surveillance system, because we no longer have flu.
The flu is magically gone.
Study the numbers in 2017 and 2018. We had 50 to 60 million with the flu, and we had a similar death rate. The deaths in the United States were 43,545, similar to the flu of 2017, 2018. We always have between 37 and 60,000 deaths in the United States every single year. No pandemic talk, no shelter in place, no shutting down of businesses, no sending doctors home. And we don't necessarily report all of our flu tests. We do thousands of flu tests every year. We don't report every one because the flu is ubiquitous. People that die from flu, with flu I should say, it's not from flu. Their lungs were compromised by COPD. They had a heart attack 2 years ago. They have a weakened body. We aren't pressured to test for flu. But ER doctors now, my friends that I talk to say, it's interesting, when I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that? Why are we being pressured to add COVID?